I must have built about 20 of these things over the last year during the prototyping phase, but this is the first time I've built one using the actual final kit from Funk, which is what's in this box. So let's see what is in here. So that, I believe, is all the components. I'll go into that in a second. And that is the case. Get out of the way. Get rid of the bubble wrap. So let's just see what's in here first of all. So the first thing is these are the cables which you need for the stomp box interface. So these go into the stomp box interface there and then into a guitar pedal there. And that cable takes the power from the system to run, again, guitar pedals from that. So we won't need that again. Then this is the main parts bag. Let's have a look what's in here. So we've got all of the sockets, all of the pots, all of the knobs. That is, it says mech and hardware. I can see the power headers, the piezo microphone, the some of the trimmers there, and the spacers that hold the thing together. That is a sticker. You've got nuts for switches, nuts for funky cons for the sockets, LEDs, more nuts for pots. That is the SD card holder, which is probably the smallest and most fragile part. Those are the screws that hold the whole thing together. That is a survey and feedback, and you can win something there. And this is the switches and more buttons. And we'll go into this in a bit, but the exact details of the switches are very specific. So that's the parts bag. I'll put that all back in here. With the cables. And then here is the case. So the case, you can see there's the 4 main circuit boards, which are all populated with all the tiny surface mount components. There is the program cards there, which were programmed by me in Brighton a few months ago. These are the stickers for the case. They go on there. They're not stickers, you have to stick them on. This is some hardware for the case, and I think that's the feet there. Then we have, just get these out. You have the power supply board there, which is the back of the whole system. And the front panel, which is what you assemble everything onto. And that's it. And then you have the foam, which goes inside the case. You might stick that down. And that's it. Okay, so before we get into any electronics, let's start with the case. We'll open this little packet of workshop case accessories. And in there is a badge, which we don't need immediately, 2 pins and some feet. So we can start with something very simple. Let's start with putting on the feet. These go on the case. So we just stick these down into the little holes here. Just makes it a bit more stable when it's on a surface, stops it slipping around. So that is done. Then the second thing we're going to do is replace the hinges on the case with these pins. So if you look on the back here, and I'm looking at the camera to try and make sure we can actually see this. If you look down there, you can see there is a black plastic kind of rod there and there, which is what's holding this lid on. And I want the lid to be removable, because then you can put this down, take the lid off and play it while it's still in the case. So to get this out, you use one of these pins, and see if I can do that while looking at the camera. Possibly not. There you go. So you push that in, that pin comes out. You use some pliers, but you might not need any. Then with this, you can bend this out a little bit. I wouldn't bend it out too much because it becomes quite tight, but bend it a bit and then thread that into the hole. And now that is a much easier way of removing the lids when you want to. So we'll do that on the other side. You can see the pin coming out. Little bend on there. And then thread that in. Okay, so that makes it, I mean, I guess it makes it a bit stronger, but critically it means you can then quite easily take off the lids and use the system inside its case, just like that. The second thing to do when you're doing this would be to, you've got a sticker in here. I call it a sticker, but it's not a sticker, it's just a label. It says Workshop System PAL label. So if you fish this out, there's one here. That side is sort of blank. You might want to use that one, but this is the proper side. This is what was designed by Alex Brewer to go there. So that fits onto the case like that. You can see quite nicely. Now the way I would stick this down, there's two ways of doing it. You can either get some kind of epoxy glue. Harold's it's in the UK, or I'm sure you get epoxy glue wherever you are in the world. And you just mix some up, stick some on the back there. Part of the reason for these stripes, because you've got the bare kind of gold there, so it'll stick better. Or you can, what I'm going to do now is just use some double-sided tape, which should work just as well. So I'm just going to sit down and stick this down. Put a scalpel here, I'm just going to cut off roughly the right length. And then I'm going to cut around it. Let's see, like that. So I can just cut inside. Just cutting the spare off here. You could probably do this more neatly, but I think this will work fine. Peel off the top of the tape. Missed a bit there. And then you can put this either way around, maybe like that. And then stick it down. You probably want to squeeze it onto the back like this. There you go, that's not going anywhere. So that is the case now finished. So the next thing we're going to do is the power supply. So that's the power supply board with a map on the back showing my house somewhere in there, and that is Brixton, and that is Camberwell, and this is South London, the area I live in. We need 2 more bags. We've got the screws bag and the workshop mech and hardware. You need a Sharpie and you need a Phillips head screwdriver. So what we're going to do here, the first thing to do, let's open up this mech and hardware bag. See what's in here. Some of these things we'll need later. So that is the contact microphone, which we will need later. These are the trimmers from the VCO to set the response very precisely. That's another trimmer. These are the power headers, which will be the first thing we solder on. Should be 4 of them. That is the key ring for your program cards. But this is all that we need now. Put that back in the box so we don't lose it. So you've got 6, these are called spacers or standoffs, and the feet and the screws. So let's start with the feet. This again is not a particularly complicated undertaking. You just put these feet in the corners. Again, this means the system is kind of stable wherever it is. This is the kind of thing I forget to do when I'm building them and do at the end, so I'm being very good and doing it properly this time. Okay, so there's 4 feet. Then we're going to put these spacers on, and to do that we need some screws. So these are little tiny flat-headed, they're like laptop screws really. Put them down there. So just take a screw, put it through the back, and screw that on. Don't really need the screwdriver, to be honest. So they're all screwed on. I can just tighten them up a little bit so they're super firm. And while we're here, I can just say a little bit about the power supply. Let's put those screws back in here so I don't lose them, because we'll need them to put the front on later on, much later on. While we're here, I can say a little bit about the power supply. So power comes in here on USB-C. So it's USB-C power delivery. It needs 15 volts. And that means it works with most, it works with basically anything work with a laptop. It should work with. It won't work with some phone chargers. So if your phone charger puts out 5 volts or 9 volts, then it won't work. You need one that does 15. I said 15 or 20. Essentially, if it does 20, it will also do 15. Or you can power it here through barrel power there. So that's a kind of standard professional 2.1 millimeter barrel power there. Down here, this is power out. So this is power to send out to run guitar pedals. So you can plug a guitar pedal in there and power the guitar pedal from this. You've obviously got various thank yous, and the 2 things you need to do before you move on is sign it in some way and then put the date, which I think today is the 20th. 1124. And then just take a note of your serial number. So each of these boards has an individual serial number on it. This is number 86. Just so you know, and at some point I will think of something clever to do with the serial numbers. So before we get into the real depths of soldering and the real kind of constructing the rest of the kit, there is one little bit of soldering to do first. So on the back of the front panel, there is a contact microphone, and I need to fish that contact microphone out of the box. You remember we saw it earlier, I think it's in here. So that's in the workshop mech and hardware. So that's this thing. Be quite delicate with it. So this is a piezo contact microphone, and we need to attach it to the back of the front panel here before doing anything else, because we're going to build the rest of the system on the front panel, and we want to get this there because otherwise I'll forget. So the best way to do this, I would say, is you can see there's a sort of circle there printed on, and this shows where the wires go. So you arrange it roughly like that. Then be really careful that it's not kind of rubbing against any of these holes or covering any of these holes. And what I would do is tape it down a bit. So I'm using this fancy Kapton tape, but you can just use whatever tape. Even just cover one up, doesn't matter, you can cover that up and come back and do that point there. So this is now strongly held down here by 2 points there. Then I need some solder, which is here. Take off a bit of solder and clean the tip. That looks okay, that looks nice and silvery. Then I think what I'll do is I'm kind of holding down both the brass disc and the gold of the circuit board, and kind of touching a bit of solder towards it, and that's worked pretty well. It's just a kind of blob. This is really just a mechanical thing to hold it on. I'll do that other side here. So that's perfectly well done. That's perfectly solid. I'll take that bit of tape off, and I might as well take the other piece off because I don't need that. And then I can solder that third point there. So you need a little bit more heat than you might normally have because this is kind of a relatively big component. But that there, hopefully you can see pretty clearly, is just soldered on. It hasn't blocked any of these holes, so you can fit all the other components through, and it's just keeping out of the way. I might actually use a bit of that tape I had just to keep these wires out of the way while I'm doing the rest of the build. That'll keep it from getting tangled into anything else. And then when we finish everything else, we'll solder those little wires onto the filter circuit board. So before we get into the rest of the building, I thought it would be useful to just talk through what the finished thing looks like, so that you sort of know what to expect and why some of the things are like they are when you're building them. So this is my workshop system. This is actually a slightly older prototype. So it's got a few little differences on the panel, but it is basically all the same. So these are, anything you can see here is really something you're assembling. So all of these sockets, all of these pots, all of these switches, these buttons, these LEDs that are dotted around, and this SD card holder. And so you kind of understand what we're looking at. There are 4 different types of pot. So a pot is what goes behind a knob. This one you can see here is a metal pot for obvious reasons. It's made of metal. And any pot that's got a knob on it, so any of these, is some kind of a metal pot. There are two types of metal pots. There's normal ones like that one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. They have 3 pins coming out the bottom. I'll show you what they look like in a minute. And that's most of them, but there are 2 different ones. This one and this one are metal, but they are dual pots. So they have 6 pins coming out of them, as you'll see when we show them. So when you come to doing these ones, and it's all marked on the PCB, you will see this. I'm not expecting you to remember this, but when you get there, this one and this one are 6 pins. All of the other ones are 3 pins. Again, you don't need to remember it. Then there are 2 types of pots of these. Sure, these are called, you call these trimmer pots. There are, I'm just not sure how clear this is on here. These are long ones. So if you can see, these are long, these are short. Those are short, these are long. The reason for this is the ones that are kind of right in the middle. So if you imagine you've got a lot of patch cables here, reaching in here, these are kind of raised up a bit, which is why they're long. All the other ones are short because they're kind of out of the way. They tend to be around the edges. So when you're assembling this, and again, this is all marked on the PCBs, you don't need to remember any of this, but you've got tall trimmers and you've got short trimmers, and those are the short ones. So that's pots. The other 2 things you can just see here, these little gold points here, they're also called trimmers, but these are little tiny trimmers. They're blue, I think we saw them earlier. And these are little screw heads. So this is how you adjust the tuning on the oscillators. But again, we'll come back to that. So that's the pots. The second thing to think about or to notice on here are the switches. And this is where it's not complicated, but it's a little bit more complicated because there are 3 different types of switches. So I guess these are the simplest switches. These are called on switches because they've got 2 positions and they are either on or on. And I hope you can see that. You can see they always have an angle. They're always on an angle because they can either be up or down. So that's the first type of switch, and those only exist in the filter here. Then you have these switches here. There's 2 of them in slopes, are called on, off, on, because they can be on, they can be on the other way, or they can be off in the middle. So these have got 3 positions. Hopefully you can see that, or at least hear that. So it's 3 different positions. And again, this is all marked on the circuit board, so you don't have to remember it, but it's just so you know when you're opening the case, when you're feeling the switches, you can feel there's these 2-way ones, there's these 3-way ones, then there are these 3 switches here, which are a more unusual type of switch. So these are called on, off, mom. And mom stands for momentary because these go up, they go into the middle, and they are momentary. So if you can hear that, they don't stick. You just tap them and they bounce back up. So it's up, in the middle, and momentary. And these are really useful. You can see particularly in slopes here, this is like a push button. So you can just tap it down. Like on the computer here, you might use it as a tap tempo. But you have to get them in the right place. And actually on my build here, you can see they're a bit shorter. The ones you have won't be like that, as you'll see when we come to it. They're normal length like this. The other thing to say about these ones is they obviously have to be in the right direction. So in all cases, you're pushing down on the momentary side. So you can imagine if you get it the wrong way round, it will be quite annoying because you'll have to push it up. Well, it won't work. So you have to get it, you have to know which switch it is and which direction it's in. And again, it's all marked on the circuit board. I'm just introducing the idea for you. The other thing you're going to build a few of are LEDs. So these LEDs here, they're all the same, the LEDs across the piece. As you can see, they have a flat top, and I build them with them kind of flush against the panel. So the way you do that is you get a bit of, I haven't got that bit of tape again. Take that back. You would put that over here, as we'll come to, and with that tape on, you stick them through in the back, and that means they're flush once you take the tape off. That's basically how you do it. Other things to look at on here, you've got these 4 push buttons. They're a little bit, they're not fiddly to put in. Again, they're just something you have to pay attention to when you're putting them in. The way we'll do the filters is you make all of this stuff, and then you go back and add the push buttons, because you have to make sure that they are sort of not rubbing against the panel. And then the final thing is down here in computer, you have this little slot here, which is it is an SD card slot, although these are not SD cards. They're something different. They're little custom memory chips. Again, it's not particularly difficult, but that's something we will need to arrange kind of properly so that it stays in the right spot, and so you can get it through the panel here. And then the only other thing to mention is there are 2 little switches here. So there is this little switch here, which hopefully you can see there, and here. That is for resetting the computer. And this switch here, which is a bit more inset and is hidden behind the port up here, that one is for connecting the computer to your laptop. That's if you want to write new firmware on here. So you don't have to do that very often, but if you do, you hold that down, tap it, and then this file appears on your desktop like a folder. But we will come back to that. When you first take these off, they're a bit stiff, but for this one in particular, we're taking it on and off, they're very easy to get on and off. So that is everything sort of mechanical that you're going to be building today. Okay, so now let's start talking about what we're going to build, the electronic components we're going to use. We can start by just looking at, let's look at one of these circuit boards. I'll open this up. So this is the VCO, which is the oscillator board. And you can see straight away, all of these tiny components here are already populated in the factory. Across the whole system, there's about 650 of these tiny components, which are op amps and resistors and transistors and diodes. They are all pre-populated on this side of the board. And there's the back of the board. And the first thing we're going to talk about, the first component we're going to talk about is the power header. So this is this little thing. Anyone who's built anything in Eurorack will be familiar with these. So that is the way power gets to the circuit board. And the critical thing here is understanding which way round it goes. So this is the back of the board. There's no components on there, and you can see all these connections are kind of marked on the back of the board. This is the front of the board, because this is where all the sockets and the potentiometers and the switches are mounted. So the power header goes out the back that way. So you solder it here. Everything else, all the solder points are on the back, away from these little components. But the power header goes like that. And I just kind of emphasize that because it is, whenever I do build workshops, sometimes somebody does put it the wrong way around, and that is quite an annoying thing to try and fix. So imagine that sitting in the system, all the sockets and pots, and this one's just got sockets and pots on it, come out the front, the power header goes out the back. So the second thing, as I touched on earlier, is the potentiometers. So there's a whole bag of pots here. So you can see a few different types here. Let me just separate them out. So that is a metal pot, as I said, with 3 legs here and a metal body. So that you'd call a metal pot. Then let's have a look, find one, because they're a bit more rare. Somewhere here, unless they're in a different bag, maybe they're in a different bag. There are, oh no, here we go. So this is a dual pot. So you can see this one has 6 legs, but it's also metal. So that's a dual pot. And then this one here is a long trimmer. And this one here is a short trimmer for fairly easy to understand ideas. So this one here is a long trimmer. This one here is a short trimmer. So those are your 4 types of pots, but that is not all there is to it. If you look on the back of any of these, you will see a value written there. So that's B100K. And I think actually all of the metal pots, the single metal pots, there's another double one, are B100K. So we'll put those to one side, all the metal ones. Then these dual ones, one is A100K, one is A1M. And you need the right pot in the right spot. And as you can see on the circuit board, all of this is mentioned. So that says tall trim B100K, that says short trim B100K, that says short trim B10K. So if I was to populate this now, I'd be looking for, there is a B100K, so that could go in there. And I'd be looking around for a 10K, there is a B10K, that will go in there. So for all these, they have the type of pot, whether it's tall or short, whether it's metal, whether it's single or dual, and the value. And you have to get both of those things right when you're assembling it. So the next thing to talk about, and I mentioned this earlier, is switches. So this bag has got lots of big messages on it to say, check for detailed instructions. That's what I'm giving you now. So let's look at these switches. So whereas the pots all look different, these don't actually look different. So in here, we'll come back to those. There you've got the tactile switches. So you've got, again, a slightly longer one and a slightly shorter one, a very subtle difference, but one's 13 millimeters, one's 12 millimeters. You can just see they're a bit different there. That's the shorter one goes under the knob, the longer one goes further down. Again, that's marked on the circuit board. Those are the push buttons. Then you've got the 3 types of switches very clearly marked. So the on are the 2-way ones, the on-off-on are the 3-way ones there, and these are the momentary ones, which again are all marked with these diagrams on the circuit board. And obviously the packing helps, but also when you take these out, actually just feel them, because then you can work it out. So this one, see, immediately you can see that clicks back. So that's the momentary side, and that clicks on. So if I was putting this into the circuit board, it would be this way round, so I push it down like that. Again, marked on the circuit board, that there is the sort of momentary side. So I would place it like this, work out which side's momentary, put it on the circuit board, just like that. LEDs, I think I've already talked about. LEDs are all the same kind. The only important thing with LEDs to know, as you'll know if you've built any kits before, is every LED of this kind anyway has a long leg and a short leg. And the long leg goes into the hole with a plus next to it. So when we come to do a board with that on it, bear that in mind. Okay, there are two things to do before we really dig into soldering. The first is a very simple mechanical thing, which is we've got the packet of switch nuts here, and you need to put one nut onto every switch. This is the sort of thing I always forget to do, or try and do later on, and it's better to do it at the start. This is just so that the height of the switch is correct, sort of behind the panel. So just one nut on here. One thing I've noticed, let's see if I can actually manage to screw it on. Sometimes, like that one has kind of closed, locked on. Occasionally they don't lock on for some reason. They get to the bottom and they kind of spin round. That's fine, doesn't make any difference. Yeah, oh no, yeah, so that one's sort of spinning. It's perfectly fine. It just, all this is a spacer to make it lock behind the panel better. Just keep these in their bags. There are the momentary ones. Do these 3-position ones. Just 2 of them. Again, just one nut on each. Keep them in the bag. I'd have to say, just make sure you know physically by your hands which switch is which, rather than just relying on the bag it came out of. And then those 3, you need 3 more nuts. One, 2, 3. Oh, that one really spins. Anyway, that is fine. Okay, so they go back in the bag. Then they're ready for when we get to do them. So the next thing I do is we're going to put on these power headers on all the boards. So you can open up these boards. You have to be slightly gentle with the computer board because it has USB connectors already poking out of it. This is the filter or the VCF. And finally the mix board. So this is the order they are in behind the panel. Not that that matters for anything. And what I'll do, the switches back in there. Put the pots over here. Okay, so here are the headers. 1, 2, 3. Then go back in there. So you put these in. Some of the boards have these kind of, the holes are sort of deliberately offset, which means it holds it into place. On one of them, on mix, there wasn't room for that, so they're just in a straight line. Either way, so you see that falls out. Put it in and then kind of balance it on the table, maybe like that. So again, you can see for all of these, we're looking at the fronts of the boards here. You can see where all those sockets go, and each of them has the power header poking out the back. So once you're happy with that, if you look at this and you're going, I can hear what Tom's saying, but I'm not sure I understand it, I don't know if it makes sense, then don't guess, you know, send a photo to support at Thonk or go on the Discord. Just make sure you get it where it should be. So let's solder these on now. The way I normally do this is just put them flat on the table like this. Get my soldering iron nice and hot. You can kind of hold it down, and then let's just do one solder point. So you can see there's one solder point, so it's held in place. And I can just look at it and check it's kind of parallel and straight, and that is all fine. And what I'm going to have to do in a minute is set up my fan to take the fumes away, which, as you can hear, is not going just yet. But we're soldering these all in. These are slightly, because the pins are quite big. Okay, so let's now assemble the first circuit board. So this is the VCO, and if we just have a quick look over the board, we've got the power head already there. So we've got a bunch of pots here. So you've got metal pot there, metal pot there. You've then got tool trim, tool trim, tool trim, tool trim, and those are all 100K. The metal pot's 100K. Then you've got two short trimmers here, so short trim 100K and a short trim 10K. So they're all 100K apart from this one. Then you've got a bunch of sockets here, a bunch of sockets here. You've got a green socket here, marked green. Those are the stereo sockets. And there's a little note here that says these sockets here are upside down. So the pin, you can see, I'll talk about the ground pin. That's the ground pin that pokes out of these sockets. On those ones, that will go down like that. What else can we see on here? There's then here and here, there are these trimmers, the blue trimmers that we saw earlier. And you can see there's a little screw, a little picture of the screw on there, and a little message saying screw this end to make sure you know which way round they are. So the way we're going to do this, we're going to assemble all those parts. Then we're going to, before soldering anything, we're going to put it together on the panel. We're going to put a couple of screws, a couple of nuts to hold it onto the panel. And then once we're comfortable with it all kind of mechanically, we'll do a couple of solder points or a solder point on each one. And then when we're really comfortable, it's all in the right place, it's all where it should be, we will go over the back and do all of these solder points to connect the whole thing together. So let's get started with that. I'll keep that here to one side. So we can start with, let's find those blue trimmers. Move the key ring in the bag for later. So these trimmers, you can see they've got a screw on one end, and the screw goes, matches up on the board there where it is. So you put it through the holes. And what I would do is try and hold it sort of flat and then just squish out a couple of these legs. So it's kind of in place. Do the same here, make sure it's lined up. Kind of hold it in place and squish out a couple of things. You can see these are still a little bit wobbly, and you can see why we do this, because when you connect this to the panel, these are going to have to fit through those little tiny holes. So it's making sure there's enough sort of flex there that it can all come together properly. So now let's do the rest of these pots. And again, we're not going to solder anything for a little while yet. So let's just put them all out here and find what we need. We need, there's a B100K, so that goes at the top there. You usually need to squeeze the legs in a little bit to get them in. And that's snapped into place. That is a double one, we don't want that. There's another B100K, that can go at the bottom. So just kind of pushing them into place there. Tool trimmers, there's a B100K tool trimmer, that goes in there. These are a bit fiddly to get in, so you usually have to squeeze them a little bit to get them through. Should be another B100K trimmer there. And there are different values of these trimmers, so do make sure you check. Yeah, it's a bit fiddly. Snap them into place. 2 more B100Ks, there they are. Squeeze it down a bit. That's in place. And another tool one. So that's not what we want, that's an A1M, which is a tool trimmer. There's another B100K tool trimmer. Okay, so that's the most dense part done. Let's get these short trimmers done. We need a B100K, which is there. And we need a B10K, which will be here somewhere because I saw it earlier. There is the B10K, right, the rest of these can go back in the bag. And there's obviously a sort of point with this of trying to take it slowly, trying to do it, make sure you're really confident about what you're doing, you know what's going where, because, you know, a little bit of slowness and double checking here is a lot more fun than trying to fix things later. I was making some of these for prototype the other day and got an LED round the wrong way, which meant it flashed weirdly, and it's just quite annoying to have to fix that kind of thing. Okay, so there's all the pots in place, and you can actually check. If you look at the back here, you can see B100K, and then there's little tiny text there. Don't know if you can see. You can check over each one, make sure as you read the back of the pot it's in the right place. And you can't. It says there, screw this end, so it's making sure you can see those gold screws are in the right place. So that's all the pots, happy with them. Now we need one green, these are the stereo pots, so this is the stereo input here. As it says, it's upside down, so that's at the bottom. Okay, so that is, that's the green one in now. We need a mass of these black ones. There's, I think, 54 of these black Funky Con sockets in the whole thing. What you have to do now is kind of slot these into place and sort of hold the whole thing together. It's a bit fiddly. You can do it on a flat surface, but we're going to kind of balance everything in. Before I do that, what I'm going to do is find some nuts. Okay, so these are pot nuts and washers. And the reason I want these is because once I've balanced everything on there, I'm going to put it behind the panel, and I'm going to need a nut to do that. So let's just take a couple of these out. And I need 2 metal ones on there, aren't there? Okay, so let's start putting all of these sockets in. So you see, this was the point with the upside down ones at the top and the regular ones. Normally that ground point is at the top. Probably a better way to do this, but this is how I do it. Sometimes you do have to straighten them up before putting them in. So you're just getting them into place, making sure the legs are through the holes. so many of these in this build. Okay, so that is all of the sockets in place. Just look over it, make sure everything is there, make sure everything's kind of reasonably lined up, reasonably straight. Now again, we haven't soldered anything at all, this is all just floating on the panel. We know that we're doing the oscillator board, so it's this section here. And I'm just going to lay that over. A little bit of jiggling usually, and that has snapped into place. So you can hear that snapped firmly in place. You can't squeeze that any further. I'm going to put these two nuts on here, just by hand. You don't need to do them any, particularly tightly. You just do them as tight as you can with your fingers. And I didn't check, but let's see if those little gold, so you see the little gold points have gone through fine, they're through the holes. And so that at the moment looks okay. We could put a couple of, these are the nuts for the sockets. There. We could put a couple of these on as well, just to make sure it's all held firmly in place. You're going to get very used to screwing these on later on in the build. That one's not going on very well. I'll put it on the one next to it. There we go, that's on there. That way up. Okay, so you can see that's all in place as it should be. You can check that the boards are parallel. They should all be kind of parallel and kind of firm. There's no kind of give at all there. It's perfectly in place. What I normally do is just check these trimmer pots can kind of move smoothly. They seem fine. So that's good, and this is the reason we start with the VCO. Is it's the simplest one, because when you get into switches and the SD card, it gets a bit fiddlier, but we'll start with this one. So now what we need to do is solder all these. One thing you can do is balance the whole thing on here. If you wanted to, you could even put a couple of screws in there and make the whole thing really firm. But what I would do now is get a bit of solder, and I'm just going to pause because I'm going to set my fan up. So you can probably see and hear I have a little sort of desk fan here that just sucks the air away from what I'm doing, and I've opened a window in the background just to let the sort of ventilation through. So what I'm going to do now is go through with the soldering iron and the solder, and I'm going to do one solder point on each component, roughly. I mean, it doesn't need to be super precise, but it's just making sure that you've got everything attached before going back and doing everything else, because once you've soldered everything, it's much harder to change anything that might be wrong. So I'm just going to run through this and do one solder point on each. So I'm just doing these points on the legs of the pots, or on the connections of the pots, rather than the bigger sort of leg connections there, because they're very hard to remove if you get them wrong. And I'll just solder the middle points on each of these trimmers. So again, one leg on each of the pots. Okay, so that's pretty much something done on every component there, so it's pretty strong. So I'm just going to turn it over and again check everything is as it should be, everything's movable, everything's going through the holes where it should be. That all looks fine. I can now go back and solder everything all the way through. Okay, so I think that is everything done. What I'm going to do is just check. Let's see if this works with the camera. I find this quite useful. I don't know if we can see that there. Anyway, I'm going to check over all of the points just to make sure that I'm not missing any. Because I'm talking to you at the same time, I feel I'm not concentrating quite as well as I normally do when I'm building these. So I could miss one. And obviously if you miss a point here, it's very easy to fix. But the sort of the sort of bugs and problems you get if you miss a point can be quite mysterious. So you imagine if you missed one of these points on the trimmer, for example, you might get kind of weird tuning, or you might get no oscillation at all, and it might be rather unexpected. So it's definitely worth checking. Also, you don't have to take the whole thing to pieces. So there is definitely one I've missed in there. Other than that, they look pretty good. What I'm doing here is just kind of reheating a couple where it's not flowed through completely. Ideally, you want it to flow through and sort of suck down into the joint. Okay, that looks good. Now the one thing I need to do is trim off the legs of those trimmers. So that VCO is done. Okay, it is now the next day. I've taken my advice and taken a break while building these. So yesterday we finished the VCO. I'm just going to take this off the panel just so we've got a bit more space to work in when we do the next board, which is the computer. So I'll just take those off. It's always good to remember where you actually screwed it down, where you put the nuts. Oh, dropped one. There are many nuts and little components under my desk, I'm afraid. So I'll just take that off, put it to one side. So the next board we're going to do is a computer, which is here. So this is one of the smaller boards, this one and mix. Actually, this is the smallest board. So if we have a look at the board here, you can see there are a couple of new things. There is a metal pot at the top, two short trimmers. Then you've got this box here called 12mm and one here called 13mm. Those are the little push buttons. So there's a slightly shorter one at the top that kind of hides behind the pot, hides behind the knob, and a bigger one at the bottom that you touch. That's the one you touch to reboot and kind of load whatever card you've put in here. So that there is the card holder, the sort of SD card sized one. You've got a switch here. This kind of funny, slightly strange looking graphic is for those switches that are momentary in one direction. So it's momentary this side, on the other side. Then down the bottom here, you've got LEDs, and you can see there's a big cross, which means the long leg goes into that side, and that's the positive side. So it's another quite straightforward one. This is a little bit fiddlier, but we'll build this one together, and I'll just talk through really the things that are different. So we'll start with the pots. We're just looking for one of those metal 100K and a short 100K and another short 100K. So those are all B100K, those pots. So we could start by putting those in. Always a bit fiddly to get these in. There we go, so the pots are in place. Let's do the little switches now. I think they are in they're not in there. Oh, they're in here. They're in with the other switches. So we're going to need these momentary switches and these two tactile switches. Keeping everything neatly in its bag so it doesn't get lost. So let's take out one of these switches. And we've talked about these already, but these are the ones which are momentary in one direction, they click in the other direction. So the momentary matches up with the circuit board here. That's the momentary side, that's the indication of momentary, so just pop that in there. And in all cases, momentary is down, as long as you know which way around the board is. So there's that. Then these two, let me just move this out of the way for a moment. So these two look the same, but if you line them up, these two look the same, but if you line them up carefully, you'll see one is slightly longer than the other one. And the longer one goes at the bottom, because that one pokes out through the panel. And you just put that in. The taller one goes at the top because that's hidden behind the knob, and the taller one you only use when you're kind of reloading the firmware, whereas the bottom one you use all the time. So that's those. Now we're going to do two slightly fiddlier things. There's the LEDs, I'll put them in one moment, and this tiny little SD card holder. If you've built radio music or chord organ of some of my Eurorack kits in the past, you'll be familiar with this thing. Okay, so this is the SD card holder, although obviously we don't have SD cards in this, they are memory cards, but it's the same size. So you can see it's got very fine little pins there that we need to solder through. And it goes, there's only one way it can go around onto the board. It has bigger pins at the top and then all those little tiny pins at the bottom. Check they're all kind of straight. They normally are. Actually, the back one looks a little bit bent. Just gently line them up and then drop that into place. And that's sort of slotted in perfectly, so all the pins are floating through. So it's getting quite fragile, this board now. What I think I'll do is just take out some sockets, put some sockets on. So you need 12 on here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll put these in. And then the last thing I'll do is come back to do those LEDs. And one thing to say at this point is I have prepared a couple of little strips of sellotape, which I'm going to use to mount the LEDs. You could also use kind of blue tack or whatever, really, something a little bit sticky that'll hold it in place. So as ever, no soldering yet. You get this all kind of ready and lined up so you can get everything aligned before you start thinking about soldering. That one's very bent. Okay, nearly done. Okay, so I can put that down very gently, make sure they're all lined up. And I now need 6 LEDs for these 6 slots down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So actually, I don't know if you can see there, there's a little bit of kind of fluff from the circuit board on there, which I'm just going to take off with some tweezers. It's just kind of, these are made of fiberglass, so it's kind of fiberglass fluff. And I'll just pick those up with a bit of tape and get them out of the way. Okay, so with these LEDs, as I mentioned before, you can see they always have one long leg and one short leg, and they have a flat top here, which is going to go through the panel. So the long leg goes into the hole marked with a cross, with a positive sign. And if you get this wrong, it's quite irritating, so do concentrate, particularly in mix, which we'll come to in a bit. I built one the other day and I got one the wrong way around because I wasn't concentrating. And it meant it didn't flash properly, which was very disappointing. In this one here, you'll see there's two little holes just there, which are not LEDs. They're for developers to connect a UART connection there. So you don't need to worry about them, but just don't put your LEDs through them. They don't have a cross, so you shouldn't do. So you can see they're all lined up neatly there now. Everything is on the panel now. And we get everything's on the board now. We can get the panel back. And this, again, you just slot into place. That's gone through very neatly. So I'll put a nut on the big pot at the top. And a couple of nuts at the bottom here. Because you want to make sure this one is aligned, because there's nothing sort of bolted on right at the bottom of the board. You should be able to see there, that's very symmetrical. There's no kind of play there at all. So that's perfectly aligned. Now, before we do any soldering, just put that very gently because it's resting on the LED pins there. Let's get a little bit of tape. As I said, you could use blue tack, whatever you want. Put it across all of those LEDs and you just push them up and through. So it's always quite pleasing. You can actually check your orientation as well when you're looking at the back. Just make sure they're all the same way round. So they all have the long leg on the same side, which they do. And you can see there, they're all kind of stuck to that bit of tape, so they're all perfectly aligned with the front. But this bit, the SD card has gone all kind of wonky, as you can see there. So I'll pick it up gently, just push that back through the holes. That's where it should be. And then put another little bit of tape across the top. So you see that's all held in place and ready to solder. The other thing is just check these legs on the tactile switches. You know, make sure, actually, have I got a short one there? No, there we go. So that was interesting. When I was pushing this down, I'd actually pushed the whole circuit board down a little bit when I connected this up. So make sure everything is symmetrical. You can see that's poking up through. And these boards are parallel. So had I soldered it then, it would have been a little bit ski-whiff. So that is how it should be. With this socket poking out, that socket flush with the board. So everything there is good. I'll balance it back on here. And let's just check that's coming through. I'll do, again, kind of one solder point on everything as I did before. Let's start, just because it's the fiddliest part, with this the SD card. If you feel it gently on the back, you can feel the pins poking through. And what I'll do is just solder one of these bigger pins and then go back and check. Yeah, that all looks good. That's all aligned and straight. That's coming out. Those are all lined up where they should be. Okay, I'll carry on now. Solder one pin of everything. Turn my fan on. And you see here the switch, that's the vertical switch there, is kind of aligned properly because we put the nut on it before. If you don't put a nut on it, you have to sort of poke it up from the back and balance it a bit. But that is perfectly lined up where it should be. So just 1 point on these trimmers. Then I'll do 1 point on each of these sockets. And obviously you can decide you're confident and just fire through and do all of the points at this stage. But if for some reason you have got something wrong, particularly with this one, the alignment, as you saw earlier, is a bit tricky with this one. Let's just do 1 pin of each of these the switches. And then I'll do 1 pin of each of the LEDs, which is quite a little bit tricky. And this is really a good example of when it's good to just go slowly. Just go gently through. You're not in any hurry. Get everything right so you don't have to come back later. Okay, so that's 1 pin on everything. I can flip over again. Just check that alignment is all right. Check those LEDs. I can peel the tape off there. Peel the tape off the SD card. That all looks good. And just one last check. Make sure the switch is down is momentary, up is permanent. Or not momentary, whatever it is. Check those are okay. That all looks good. I'm just going to go back and solder all the rest of the points. So the way I'm doing each of these is I touch the soldering iron to the 2 pins, or just the pin and the board rather, and then just flow in about 1 millimetre or 2 of solder, I suppose. Just to make sure it really sort of sucks into the joints. And it obviously helps to do it in a kind of ordered, predictable way, rather than just zipping about randomly over the board. Because if you miss a point, it's a relatively easy thing to fix, really, because you can just come back without even taking the panel off. But it's kind of annoying. So I'll do these other joints on the LEDs. There's a bit fiddly there. Do the last points on the bottom tactile switch. And then, saving the best to last, I'll do the other big connection here. So these little solder points here are smaller than anything else you'll be doing here. They're not, I think, super difficult. I don't think we had many people had trouble with them with radio music. Lots of those were made. But you just have to be a bit careful, a bit gentle. The sort of green solder mask sort of keeps the pins separated, so they shouldn't sort of splodge together and short circuit. And obviously there are much smaller surface mount connections on the other side. But you do just have to be a bit careful, make sure that they're all lined up. And that would be a good point to get a trusty magnifying glass. I use this ridiculous magnifying glass, which my daughter gave me years ago for Christmas once. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see this on the camera. There we go, sort of like that. I'll just check it. Yeah, they're absolutely fine. They're quite good, neat collections there. So what I'll do now is just look over the board myself, make sure everything is as it should be. You can see there's not like masses of solder on that leg, but there's enough to connect it, make it sturdy. It should be fine. Yep, that looks good to me. So we just need to trim off the LED legs. Making sure to catch the ends, they don't fly off into your eyes. And computer is now finished. Okay, the next board we're going to work on is mix, which is the mixer, obviously, on the far right. So there's the board with the power header already connected. And this one, I've done this third because this is probably slightly more difficult computer just because it's really dense. You can see there how dense it is with this little block of trimmers and for the mixer there. Then you've got two types of switches. So on the left, you've got the three-way up, middle, down ones. And on the right, you've got up, middle, momentary ones. And the same at the bottom here. You've got our first dual pot there, you see with the 6 legs at the bottom there. You've got a couple of stereo pots there, the green ones. So there's a lot going on, and it's quite sort of tight down here where you've got the switches with the LEDs in between. But should be fine. So let's go through. Let's first of all find the pots. So we need these B100K, the short ones here. We need 4 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4. And B25K, which are the 2 stereo pan controls there. You see that's 25K. Don't think there's any long ones in this one. Another 100k. That's a long one. Another 25k. Another 100k. Another 100k. So that's 400k short ones, two 25k short ones. We then need two 100k metal ones. So there's one. There's another. And we need that double one. So we've got the two double pots here, which you can see with 6 legs each. And one will be A1M and one will be A100. This one needs A100, it says there. That's all our pots. So all the rest of those go on the VCF board. So let's put these pots on. Start with, doesn't matter what order you do, it's always a bit fiddly up in this corner. Start with the 25k. As usual, squeeze them in a tiny bit. Get them in. Check, that's 100k, yep, that's 100k. Okay, that little mass of pots is all in place. On an earlier prototype this was a bit more spread out, but that meant it wouldn't fit into a Eurorack case, so it got squished down a bit. These 100k metal pots, one at the top. Ooh. There it is. And one at the bottom. Okay, let's put this dual one in. Just really check with this that the legs are kind of decently lined up. They're fine actually, because obviously it's fiddly to get through. I put the legs through first, they're through, and then, I don't know, I call them both legs. Put the contacts through first and then the legs first. So you can see they kind of sit a bit closer down to the board than these ones. That is all good. Why don't we, let's actually just do all the pots and then we'll go back, and all the sockets, and then we'll go back and do these afterwards because they're quite fiddly. So looks like in this kit we are missing a green. I have no doubt dropped it somewhere. Let's put the rest of them in. Okay, we're definitely missing a green pot. No, we're not. There it is. I didn't think we would be. Thunk are very good with these kits. So, I was going to say, if you were missing it, just stop and email Thunk and say something's missing. But that is very rare, I think. They seem to know what they're doing. Okay, what I'll do, let's solder on those parts first, because these bits here are quite fiddly, and we can go back to them in a moment. So I'll grab the panel, put this on, and as we're now kind of used to, that slots into place very nicely. I'll put on the nuts there and there. And again, like as with computer, sort of this area doesn't have anything sort of holding it to the panel, because you have this mass of these which don't have nuts on them. So just make sure all that we're going to be really careful to make sure that is parallel and it's all kind of neat and where it should be. So let's have a look. First thing is to kind of feel. You can feel there is no play there. That's very solid between the two boards. And if you look, it's all very symmetrical. You can see those are perfectly aligned, as they should be. There's not much to it. Let's just make sure these are all freely turning. And we'll turn over and solder that together. As usual, let's do one pass and then go back and do the rest. So I'll just do the contact, the middle kind of contact pin on each of those pots, and up here. Now if you're doing it in two parts, as we are here, you obviously have to really be careful not to accidentally solder the parts you haven't populated. So here, in here is those little masses of switches and LEDs. Obviously don't dab any solder on there, because that'll make it very difficult to install. You can see there's nothing poking through, there's no reason why you should. So that's one solder point on everything there. Make sure again everything is aligned as it should be. That looks pretty solid. There's no kind of play, those are absolutely parallel, those two boards. So let's do the rest. So some people solder these legs, and I do mean the proper, these chunky legs here, on pots. Some people don't. I think with these trimmers you probably should, because they'll hold them much more stable. With the metal pots up there, they're really kind of bolted to the front panel very firmly, so if you don't want to solder those legs, you don't have to. I always do. I think it's also a ground connection, so it's actually a connection between the front panel and the circuits. There's obviously lots of connections between the front panel and circuit, so it's not a particularly big deal. Another thing you'll notice while you're soldering back here is this area here and this area here. There's a little connector, a little sort of jumper. That one, there's a wire between them. That one is open. And these change the response on the envelope generators on the slopes. So if the connection is open, like the top one, it's a linear slope, so it goes in a straight line. If it's closed, like the bottom one, it's a exponential slope, so it kind of moves faster. So don't do this now, but after a while, if you find that you prefer the bottom one, you can come back and solder close that joint, or if you find you prefer the top one, you can come back and with a scalpel cut that joint. Just move this a bit closer to the fan to make sure it doesn't go in my face. Bit fiddly, these little double pots, but they're not too bad. Okay, so I'll check that at the end once we put the rest of it on. But that's obviously now all kind of mechanically stable. So take the panel off again. Whenever I do this, I forget which nuts I've put on and get stuck. Okay, so now we're going to do these two areas of switches and LEDs. So we need, from the switch pot, we need none of those. So we need two of these on, off, on. These are the kind of 3 position ones. That's the last two. And we need some LEDs, which are there. And we need the last 2 of these momentary ones. So if we look at the board closely, we can see the left-hand switches on both sides are the momentary packet. I was just getting the labels back, I haven't dropped them on the floor. So the left hand side is that symbol, which is on, off, on, which are these 3 position ones. So they lock in that side, they lock in that side. So that is a 3 position one. That's a momentary one. That's a momentary one. That's another 3 position. So the 3 position go on the left, and they can go either way around, it doesn't make any difference. But the momentary ones, as I have mentioned before, that's down, that's up, and that's down. So the momentary is a push down, and that's what's marked on the panel. That's the momentary side. So if we look there, that goes in that way. Let's check which is momentary on here. That's momentary. That goes down. So you can see, a bit fiddly to test, but they're down. Then in between those two in between those 2 switches are 4 LEDs. So let's get 4 out. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's just checking the orientation again. You can see the long side, and you can see hopefully quite clearly at the top the right hand hole has a plus, so the long leg goes in there. On the one below, it's the left hand hole has a plus, so that goes in there. Down below, it's the right hand hole of the top one has a plus, and the right hand hole of the bottom one has a plus. So they are all in place. You can kind of I'm not sure you can see on the camera, but you can look at the bottom and just check they're the right way round. So let's put the panel back on. Over here. Make sure it's on tightly. I'll put a couple of nuts on here as well, just to make sure the whole thing is held together firmly. Okay, now you're going to need some kind of tape or blue tack to hold these LEDs in place. So I've got a bit of tape, although I think actually blue tack might be better for here. So just kind of making sure, and if you can see that the tops of the two holes are covered. It doesn't need to be particularly tidy. So you can then push those LEDs back through. And make sure they're kind of stuck in place. So you can see them, hopefully. The LEDs are sort of flush with the surface again. So I can go over and solder this little corner, these two corners together. I might just do the whole thing now. Actually no, I'm going to do one leg of the LEDs because I do want to make sure they're lined up properly. So if I do one leg, I can remove the tape and make sure it's lined up properly. But I'll do all the pins of the switches because they're pretty straightforward. Okay, let's just check on those LEDs, remove the tape. Yeah, they look okay, they're lined up. I mean, actually, if I'm going to be really picky, that bottom one's a little bit low. I mean, I'm not normally really picky, but let's just... There we are. I just kind of melted the solder, smushed the LED down a tiny bit, and now it's perfectly lined up. Hopefully you can see that in the light. So what I must do then is remember to go back and solder the other legs, because otherwise they won't work. And I'll trim off these legs. Now I need to really carefully check over the board and just make sure all of the points have been done and look good. And there's a couple that look like they could have a little, something like that. I'm just re-melting it. I think it needs a tiny bit more solder, that little. There you go, that's fine. You sort of see the capillary action starting to work, and the, instead of being a sort of round blob, it's like a little cone or a volcano or something. Yeah, there's a few to touch up here. And if you have a magnifier of some kind, it's probably quite useful to really go over it with a magnifier just to make sure you're happy with everything. And most of all, you haven't missed one. Okay, I think that is done for mix. So we're now ready to do the last board, which is the VCF, the filters. So this board is definitely the most complicated because it has switches and buttons and LEDs and everything on it, but that's what we're doing at last. So if we look at the board here, you can see you've got a dual pot there, that's one with 6 legs, a metal pot there and there for the frequencies on the filter. You've got 4 tool trimmers, B100s there, A100s there, and a short trimmer for the voltages. Down here you've got the push buttons. These are the lit up push buttons with voltages, and you can see hopefully pretty clearly marked the flat sides of those, so you have to get them oriented the right way around. Then you've got 3 of these 2-way switches, so these, it doesn't matter which way round they go, they just go in there. And then you might not immediately notice along the top, you've got, along the top up here, you've got 4 LEDs, and you can see the pluses on each of those for which way the long leg goes. That's essentially it. Then the last thing which we will do is attach the contact microphone up there, which we soldered onto the panel first of all. This one, so let's make a start on this. I'll start with the pots. This should be all of the final pots, there shouldn't be any spares. So that's a B100 metal. There is another B100 metal. Then there is that dual pot, you can see, with 6 legs there. That goes in at the top here. With these, as I said before, you need to make sure the legs are all lined up before you try and put them in. So that's there. And then there are 2 types of tool trimmers here. There's the A1M ones on that side and the B100 on this side. There's another B100. There's another A1M there. And then there's a short trimmer, which is B100. And I'm not completely sure why there's 2 spare B100s there. They may have just fallen into my case with whatever else I'm doing around. So let's put these together. So check that's the A1M, and it is. There's the other A1M at the bottom. Little squeeze. And there's the B100. B100 goes in there. And another B100 in there. And finally, it's the short trim here. Okay, what I think we'll do with this is I'm going to save these push buttons till later. We'll do them as a sort of second round because they're a bit fiddly to get through. But we'll do the switches and the sockets all together now. So here's the sockets we need 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 sockets. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. And these 3 switches, which should be in here. Oh, and there's the LEDs. I mustn't forget the LEDs. Here are the switches, still in the switch bag. 3 2-position toggle switches. And there are those are the push buttons. And those are the toggle switches. So let's put the switches in first. So these are 2-way, doesn't matter which way around they go. 1, 2, 3. Then we can put, actually let's do the LEDs when we do those buttons, that's fine. I mean, with all of this, it doesn't particularly matter the order you do it in. It's just you can put everything in at once, but it then is a bit fiddlier to get it through the panel on this one. So I would suggest let's leave the LEDs and the push buttons until kind of the next round. So put these all in. So that, I think, is everything. So now the tricky thing with this is obviously, I might just take the mix off the panel so we've got a bit more space. The tricky thing with this is you've got these switches that go left and right, up and down, and it's tricky to get them through the panel because they are at an angle. So there are different ways of doing it. You can either try to balance them so they stick straight up. I'll show you what that means. That's the way Steve at Thong does it. Let's just have that plain panel. So those are our finished boards. So you can take one and say, right, can I balance it like that so it's straight? If I can do that, that works pretty well. But obviously it might not, might not stay straight. Or the other thing you do really is just, we'll put these through. Let's make sure that's here. I can just kind of jiggle that one in, jiggle that one over. There you go, they're all through now. And so again, as with all these, you're making sure that's really firmly, clearly in place. Do 2 nuts, and then we can check it's all parallel and where it should be. So it feels good, there's no kind of play there, and that looks pretty solid and pretty parallel to me. So I think we can now do the first round of soldering. Just for that, and I'll turn the fan on. And as before, I'll just do a single point on each of these components. Again, you might find by the time you got to this board, you're pretty confident in what you're doing, so you don't feel the need to do this single point and check. It's totally up to you. The point is that obviously with just a single point changed, it's pretty easy to change anything. A single point soldered rather, it's easy to change anything. So if for some reason something's a bit wonky, like if a trimmer isn't quite straight, it's easy to go back and check. Easy to go back and change even. The other thing, of course, is when you're assembling these, you won't be having to try and talk about it and explain what you're doing all the way through, which I think would make it a bit easier. So that's soldered up. There's a couple of missed there. Let's now turn it over and check. All these are smoothly turning, and the switches, again, it doesn't matter the orientation on those. That looks fine, and it is all very much parallel. So I think that's fine. I can go ahead and solder all the rest of it together. So I think that's everything, and again I'll go back and check once we've done the other parts, the push buttons and the LEDs. So the LEDs, again, I think we're quite used to it by now. They need to be 4 of them there. And as ever, the long leg goes into the side with a cross on it. So there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. And then these push buttons, you can see they have a flat side on one side. You see that? And the flat side goes where this line is. I'm not sure you can actually fit them in the other way, but just to be sure. Flat line goes there. Flat line in the middle. And these have got very fine little legs for the LEDs there, so you might possibly have to straighten them up, but mine are all okay. So they all fit there, and I think you can probably see the flat sides all lined up. So let's try the balancing technique. I'm going to take all these switches and balance them in the middle. Just about. And then put the panel back on. There we go. Sometimes you have to jiggle a bit to get these through. But that is all through. That feels okay. I'm going to screw these back on. So the LEDs at the top, again, you have to do a bit of tape. Same trick as before. Run them through. You can check, look at the legs to make sure they are all sort of pointing in the same direction. And that's all taped up nicely, so that's fine. These switches, the buttons, you can see them there maybe. Obviously these have to be able to move freely and be kind of firmly down. So you could probably do that with some tape. But I'm not going to do that. I'll show you the way I do it. So you put them this way round, get them held in some way, and somewhere where you can get your finger underneath. So if you can see that, I'll just move it all up a bit. I'm zoom it in. I'm kind of holding the thing underneath, the button underneath, and pushing it up. And what I'm going to do is push it up and then solder one of those legs, keep it in place, and that should do the job. So one finger goes underneath, just holds it up, and solder the leg in place. Do it for this one. Next one. Don't forget to wait a second for it to cool down before you move your finger away. And this one. So now, as you can see, they've all just got one leg soldered, and I can turn it over and check that they are all fine. They're all moving smoothly, that's great. I'll check all the other parts. All looks good, and now I just need to solder the LEDs and the rest of those switches. Okay, now I'm going to trim those legs, make sure the LEDs are all where they should be. Perfect. Trim off the legs. Now I'm going to really check this one over, make sure I haven't missed anything. Absolutely missed a joint, first of all. That would not be good. And another one. This shows where you shouldn't talk to people while you are soldering boards together. And if you do, you should make sure you check afterwards. Gosh, I think there's another one there. So a few of these, I'm just kind of heating them up, possibly adding a tiny drop more solder if it looks a bit dry, and heating it up particularly if it looks like it hasn't sucked down inside the joint. It's a bit of a sort of blob at the top. But they all look pretty good. So that is the filter done, and what we'll do next is assemble the whole thing. So let's take the panel, and we've got our 4 circuit boards. We can start, might as well just start from the left. Actually, before I start, we're going to need a few more nuts. So that's switch nuts, that's pot nuts and washers. Okay, so computer, we just gently put it through. It should go through perfectly, and it does. I never bother with the washers, but there we go, I just did one. You are welcome to use the washers if you want to. I'm just doing this all by hand, sort of hand tight to start with, to make sure everything goes together as it should do. There'll be plenty of time to put on all the nuts later on. So that's in. Now we need VCO. That goes through. why don't I do these washers, seeing as they're here? Can't do any harm. So what I'm going to do is get this sort of strong enough so we can just plug it in and test it, but not put all the nuts on just yet. Now for a filter, I think maybe this works, this balancing trick. So balance those switches in the middle. Feed them through. And then the last mix, just make sure the switches are all upright. There we go. Very smooth. Okay, so that is all kind of held together. There's just a couple more solder points to do. We'll solder on the contact microphone. So this is very simple. Just take that into red. That's the red cable marked red. You might need a bit of tape to hold it in place. Or I might just need to hold it. But if you can see up there, that's where it's going in. So the red will go into the red. This is when you need 3 hands, really. Maybe I will tape it down. Even that's a bit fiddly. Okay, that one is in. And that one is in. And maybe just tuck the wires out of the way a bit if you can. Keep them out of the way. So that is now all done. Okay, now it is time, now we've assembled everything, it's time to power it up and just check it's working. This is always an exciting moment. I always get nervous doing this. So you've got the 4 power headers on the back here. These slot into the 4 power headers here. You have to be pretty gentle and careful doing this, and particularly taking it off. Do it really carefully, but you're just slotting them in to place. And you might need a little bit of a jiggle, but they will all go in just like that. And obviously later on you'll do those screws there. But that is now connected up. You've got the on-off switch there. Let's turn that off for now. I'm going to power this from my mini rig here. So I just have a normal USB cable. USB cable goes in the back. And this goes into the mini rig. And a moment of truth, we turn it on, and the first thing you see is all 4 lights come on here. And that means it's got power, it means it's working. This is kind of a sort of hardware glitch in voltages, so all 4 lights always come on. As soon as you press one, just one lights up. So that shows it's got some power. There's a way to test that you're getting the right power. I know this is showing me, this should be giving the system 15 volts, which is what it needs. But the way to test that is to go to slopes, put that switch in the middle and put that switch to loop. And then just turn the pot until you see it going at a rate you can tell. You can see that flashing up and down. That means it's getting the power it needs. Let's just check the bottom one. So initially, that all looks good. It's getting the power it needs. It seems to be working. We can also turn this up and just tap it. And you can see those lights are lighting up. That suggests the contact mic is connected, the amplifier is working, it's all good. Let's just check sound. So I'll take a stereo into the phone socket and then across into here. I was a bit unsure about the mini rig when it starts up. And then take a patch cable from sine into here. And because you haven't got knobs, you can't really see what's happening. So that's working, definitely. That's working. The FM's working. The ring mod's working. The contact microphone's working. And if I've got one more cable, we can even test the filter. So let's take a square wave. I think that's working fine. So now we've tested that it's all working. It's just a case of mechanically finishing off the assembly. So let's start with find a screwdriver and find a little bag of screws. It should be in here somewhere. There they are. So I can put these 4 screws, 6 screws even, onto the front. So that's all assembled. Now it's the long and tedious process of putting on all the nuts and then finally putting on the sockets there. Not sockets, the knobs. So these are the switch nuts. So just put those over there. And all these switches are differently fiddly. I would say definitely do this before you do put on the knobs, because you've got a bit more space to play with. And do them sort of hand tight. so they are in place. They really are surprisingly fiddly, these. This is very exciting content for you all. Okay, so they're all on. What I would do now, so the way I'm doing this, I've got some pliers with a bit of tape around the end so they're less likely to scratch. And I'm just going to go around and tighten up all of these bigger nuts. And they obviously don't need to be like super tight, but just so they don't come loose. There must be, do put in the comments if you know a better way of tightening nuts like this, if there's a particular device or a special type of pliers that doesn't scratch the panel. I've got a beautiful guitar amp over in the corner that I made that has a big massive scratch on the front panel next to one of the pots because I didn't have a clever way of doing it. It's possible, of course, that waving it around in the air while tightening them isn't the best way to do it, but it seems to be how I'm doing them. Okay, they're all good. So now the only thing to do is, I say the only thing, it's all of these Funky Kong nuts, which you just have to rattle through. And I assume this bit will be sped up when I put this video up on YouTube. So I'm putting these on finger tight again because I do have a magic tool for tightening them up afterwards. I mean, it's funny this because it is such a time-consuming process, but I do think it makes the whole thing feel really kind of sturdy. Something I found when I meet people with one of these is they kind of pick it up and immediately say, oh, it's very sturdy, it feels good, you know, all these knobs that are bolted onto the front panel. It's quite different from if you're trying to mass produce something cheaply, and you have to have it assembled. You would need to pay somebody to do this. So this will take, I don't know, half an hour or something. I'm just hoping my phone battery doesn't run And there's no real way around it. If you want this effect properly bolted on, every component bolted onto the front panel, you have to pay somebody to do it. Or, as I have done, you have the customer do it. And it does, you know, I do think it's good. I think it's good end results you get. But I've done a lot of these now, and it is quite frustrating. I'm hoping somebody will, I can't remember the word for it, there's a word for, I think it's case matched, which people do with screws, where when you're building something out of wood, you set it up so all of the screws have the screw heads perfectly aligned. I'd be interested if somebody could make one of these with case matched Thing nuts. So if you've done that, do send me a note. I think I have got the knack of doing this now, actually. I suspect if you're following this along, it's the first time you've done this, you'll be finding it a little bit slower than I'm going. There's a little knack to kind of flipping them on and getting the threads right. And having said that, no doubt I'm about to lose that knack. You do get some as well that are a little bit tough to get on. I usually just take them off and move them to a different one, see if that works better. Otherwise, you can normally just sort of tighten them into place. But if you get a really wonky one, I would not force it. Right, we're nearly halfway there, maybe. And I have I'm very supportive to people actually doing this. If I start seeing videos when these are around the world of people with only 4 nuts on, I'll be very disapproving. That's a bit of a stiff one. Okay, I'm on the last module, that's good. How are your fingers if you're following on at home? Yeah, these are definitely a lot faster than when I first did this, I think. Having done several thousands of these now, of the nuts, because there's 58 in each board, I am getting better at it. Now, have I missed any? Can't see any. Okay, so that is all done, and as you can see, I've got 3 Thing nuts left, which I think is quite normal. There's usually a few spares in there. And I have this magic tool, which comes from Thing. So I can now go across and just tighten everything up. This is the point where if I have made a mistake and I need to take it apart, it becomes quite annoying, which is why I tested it first. Put that one on upside down so it doesn't have the screw thread poking out. There we go. Okay, so that is almost done. The only thing we need to do, which is very pleasing, is the knob bag. So turn them right down and align it with the start of the, there we go. And with these ones, actually, you can push them right down. Oh, except that one. That one's rubbing against the switch. So definitely don't push that one right down. You need to be able to feel that one turning smoothly. If you push it down too far, you might bump onto the switch. And this one here, this one has a screw underneath it. So again, you might just check it's firmly on, but it's not rubbing against the screw. There we are. So that is now complete. It can go back into its box. And that is your workshop system.